Well, at the moment, I don't think it's really clear what is going to happen, except that we are going to need to contend with these tariffs. They are expected to be reenacted, and that would be a dramatic problem for everyone in the spirits industry. I mean, our exports in the craft industry in particular have been essential for our growth. You know, craft spirits companies have relied on export as a way to build their companies up and to grow. And it's been very helpful. In fact, exports for craft brands were up about 5% this past year, at a time in which we'd been experiencing a lot of other issues in growth, at least locally in the national market. So exports are important.
Well, Sonat, I'm curious about how you make long-term decisions as a business owner, a business operator in that environment with all that uncertainty. You think about, what goes into your business. You have to buy grain, you have to buy barrels and more. You have to decide how much and when to buy them. How do you put together a decision tree given all of these unknowns?
It's very difficult, in part because, while we're always playing futures, we're also thinking about the past. And the past is that we've spent decade growing our business in some of these markets. If we think about Europe, Europe is one of the most important export markets for all spirits in the United States. I believe it's around 40% of our export. And with that in mind, spirits companies, whether they're small like mine or large like one of these legacy brands in America, you go into these markets, you develop relationships. There's a lot of time and energy that goes into that. You're building trust with your partners. You're building trust with the avenues that are selling your products in those areas. And when they see that tariffs are on the horizon, that makes them nervous. So we've already been through this before, where we've had to reassure our partners that we're still invested in these markets, that all of the work that we've done was not in vain. We still were going to these trade shows, still going to try and promote our products abroad. But then when you think that these tariffs are not just going to be what they were before, but 50%, that's dramatic. That's really actually quite catastrophic, particularly for members in the craft industry that have been, holding on to these relationships despite all of the other things that have happened, despite the challenges that we experienced during COVID, despite the challenges we're experiencing in general in the spirits industry, which is not seeing the kind of growth that it was before. It's very, very difficult. So do we want to lose those relationships? Once you're off the shelf, it's 1,000 times more difficult to get back on.
Yeah.
But it's also questionable, do we want to put away a lot of product, for a future that's very uncertain?
Oh, look what happened to Bud Light when they lost shelf space. And that's, really a household name. On the other hand, it's $6 for a six-pack is a lot different than a bottle of good bourbon. You're going to pay pretty much what you have to, right? And if you're sitting in Berlin, you're going to want to buy bourbon that's made in America. You're not going to buy bourbon from some other country, just like you won't buy scotch that's made in, Montana, right? It seems like spirits is kind of the OG protectionist market because all of these different kinds of drinks are made in their home country and they need to stay there. How much is that still true, Sonat?
Well, bourbon is an American product. You can't make bourbon anywhere else. And so if you are sitting somewhere in Europe and you want bourbon, you can only get it from America. 63% of all spirits exports are whiskey. And I would say bourbon is a huge part of that. And that's really, really going to be problematic. If you think about it, the U.S., we export about $2 billion in spirits, and whiskey being a large part of that. And, if all of a sudden it's going to cost so much more, you might want to try a product from somewhere else. Maybe some of these new emerging whiskey markets like Taiwan or like Japan, or even within Europe, you have a proliferation of local brands, especially within the craft industry. If we think about the craft movement in general, it was actually pretty much worldwide. It started in the United States. In the early 2000s, you had only about less than 100 craft distilleries in the United States. Now you have about 2,600 craft distilleries. There's that same proliferation in Europe. And those brands are also trying to get shelf space.
Right.
Luckily, a lot of American brands got in there. And, we're all about, the American spirit. And people love that. And they want to enjoy that. They want America to be part of their celebrations because
Right.
we stand for a lot of great things.